Mitch, why don't you start with name, what you did on Shadowrun?
Name, rank, serial number.
Yep.
I'm Mitch Gittleman, executive producer, co-director, and one of the writers.
I'm Spencer Curtis. I'm a tall guy / environment artist.
I'm Kevin Maloney, and I did some level design and did the Matrix revamp.
Hi, I'm Cassidy Aquino-Berg, and I was an environment artist on Shadowrun Hong Kong.
Hi, I'm Tristan Ishmael, and I was the environment art lead.
I'm Trevor King-Yost, and I was the design lead.
I'm Mike McCain, and I was the co-director with Mitch.
My name's Tyler Carpenter, and I was a designer and writer on the game.
My name's Connor Monahan, and I was one of the level designers.
My name is Andrew McIntosh, and I was lead writer on Shadowrun Hong Kong.
I'm Chris Klemecki, I was the producer on the project.
The docs, we started actually, it was around the same time we were doing the Kickstarter. We were developing the doc scene based on the story that we had at that point. But the story did go through a lot of changes, so...
I think we rewrote the dialogue in the doc scene 7 times.
Yeah.
All up.
There's some interesting stuff, like when we first built it, you were coming there with Duncan and Raymond.
Right.
Raymond was there with you, and you were going through to meet the Shadowrunners with Raymond, like you were protecting him on the way there, and then we ended up changing the story.
Well, Andrew came up with the idea of Raymond not being with us.
Yeah, that was primarily to solve the problem of us putting you in a position where you're supposed to guard Raymond, but then because of the mainline story requirements, you not being able to do that. We didn't want to put you in a position where we set you up for failure at the very beginning.
Right,
There's no way
originally
around
what was
it.
going to happen was you were going to escort Raymond, you were going to meet Raymond, and then Raymond would be stolen, like, right out from under you.
Right. And
making you completely feel like, I'm the worst Shadowrunner in the world.
yeah, exactly. And because of some of the experiences we had in the Director's Cut of Dragonfall, specifically in the Lodge run, we ran into a similar issue there, and we wanted to just avoid that all around.
One of the things that happened to me is, so Trevor built the scene, and I knew it was in the scene, but when we get to the whole, the scene, the part where all the snipers happen, that was one of the most effective things you've ever done, right? And it's just like, oh my god! And I knew it was coming, and it didn't matter. Oh shit!
Yeah, pretty much. Like, you see, like, 4 people kind of explode into gore within a couple seconds of each other, and that sort of sets the stage for your adventure.
Effective opening.
Welcome to Hong Kong!
It's not really going to be a positive experience.
The Shadowrun equivalent of, you all meet in a tavern. Well, you all meet in a bloodbath.
Yeah. Duncan originally started out really pissed off at his sibling, and it was kind of a melodrama sort of thing. It was really over the top, but it, you know, I don't know. From my point of view, it's sort of like, go way over the top and then we'll dial it back. But Kevin actually had a lot of feedback on that particular one. It's just like, whoa, man.
Yeah, because it, like, although, like, when we conceived of, like, the relationship of the player and Duncan, it made sense, and like, and as the things were going to progress, what that relationship was, it would all play together. It's just that, like, as a player, that's the first time you're meeting this character, and you don't really know how to interpret all this history that we still have yet to introduce. So it was just sort of like I think it's just a problem of context. But
yeah, well, what was interesting about it was what I was trying to do in the writing of that thing was sort of slowly string you along that and unfolding your history with Duncan and with Raymond during the scene, and some of it worked, but it was really Trevor's wife Jo who played it, who realized, you know, you need to solidify this relationship right here. This is the moment where you need to explain it much more clearly, and we had iterated on that a lot until she pointed it out.
We finally added that flashback.
Yeah.
3 weeks before she had that.
Before that.
This is how the sausage is made, kids.
No,
I mean, it is.
3.5. Come on.
Yeah.
Give us a time. HPS time, that's like
I mean, I've never had and admittedly this is just over the course of our 3 Shadowrun games, but I've never had an experience where the initial hook book. The Act 1 establishing of the characters and overall premise didn't take like by far the most iteration time.
Yeah.
If that doesn't sync with the player, then the rest of the experience just sort of compounds on that error.
We did like Monica and the Vault and Audrun and all that like 15 times or something.
Yeah,
in Dragonfall.
yeah.
So-
It's set the hook, reset the hook,
And there's
reset the hook.
I'll be honest, there's probably a certain like I feel like a lot of writers will kind of fixate on their first paragraph or even their first sentence a lot, and there's probably an element of that too. It's like, well, this is the very first impression. Like, it's got to be.
We could be a little anal.
I would love to get a little bit of the artist's view on the base because we all know that Cassidy made boats.
Let's talk about
Oh, did I make those?
So the first thing, let me just start with a lot of people saying, no water, don't do water. Right? Do you remember this during pre-production? It's like, yeah, don't do water. It's like, all right, so we'll put it in a harbor.
We were talking about putting the boats and having it drained. Have a drained harbor with just people in the mud on the ground, like in the boats that
it was
used to
part
be
of global
there.
warming or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, in the future things change.
Yeah, global
or we could
warming,
make the water.
or some.
This is how we challenge ourselves.
Or we could do our jobs.
Global warming makes the water go the other way.
Yeah, we actually did end up making that water area bigger than it is in real life.
Yeah, we took an existing canalway and we made it basically a major causeway, and we sort of projected, well, the water levels come up, so this area is, much closer than it was to these bodies of water. And that was our justification, basically, for be able to have the geography of the walled city and our home base.
Yeah, because it wasn't that was
in proximity.
The walled city's pretty
the walled city wasn't there originally.
Nope.
No,
when like we moved it. And we moved it closer because we just wanted it to be more clear and present to where you were.
As a part of making the walled city closer to the water, we had this idea, or Mike had this idea, that the walled city had been built onto over time, that people had been erecting more and more of these sort of unstable structures, and the walled city had been sort of growing like a fungus to expand all the surrounding territory, and that worked really well with the theme, and I thought it was visually really cool.
Right, yeah, because the existing, or the formerly existing in the real world Kowloon walled city is quite small. It's only a few blocks. And ours is like, as you say, like a sprawling fungus. Like, it's just like a megaplex.
Right, and so the rebuilt walled city was essentially the size of the old one. It's just had all of this new
bolt-on.
Yeah, exactly. Structure bolted onto it. Yeah.
Andrew originally came up with Kindly Cheng, and he had that initial sentence describing her, which I love, and he's the one who came up with the whole anti bit, which is great, and but somehow we reassigned her to me. And as I'm going through, I'm trying to find her voice, and finally it was actually McCain, and it was McCain, I think, and Chris Rogers, who was the art director on the project at the time, who's like, Al Swearingen from Deadwood. And so I went back, and I'm watching that, and it was just like, got it! It was just like, click! And that was really fun. And that's when I decided that by the time you get there, Gobbet and Isabel are in real trouble, and they're sweating and stuff, and just to make the player feel the sense of danger, we let the NPCs around them feel the danger for you. And so that was easily my favorite scene to write in the entire game.
Yeah, Kindly Cheng was very much conceived as sort of an anti-Paul Amsel in terms of tone.
Yeah.
She is not the
trustworthy
sort of, mentor who guides you through everything. I mean, it's always supposed to feel at least a little bit dangerous.
She's not Giles from Buffy in any way.
I would marry Kindly. I would.
You are not the first person to say that. When we were at the Penny Arcade Expo, PAX Prime, there was a woman who came up to me and was like, I would marry Kindly Cheng. And I thought...
Wasn't it like an older...
Yeah, she was
woman?
older than me, so think about that. And I'm like, what the hell is wrong with you? But then I'm going on Tumblr and I'm reading other people want to marry Kindly Cheng.
Really? Yeah.
What have we created?
I don't know.
We intended the walled city to be only seen in Act 3. Right. And we were going to mythologize it until we got to Act 3. And then Mike thought it was wise that we have it right there, just on the edge of Hong Kong, right? And I thought that was a great ad. And then it's like, well, if it's sitting right there, let's start the game right there, too.
Yeah, and some of the thinking that we sort of restructured in doing that was, the very earliest drafts, the Yama Kings were going to have already been in the walled city.
Right.
For the, and sort of the walled city was going to be this place that, again, we mythologize and build up, and it's where these horrible spirit beings live, and so there was this thought of, well, we can't have you go there if this is where the big bad things live, because how are we going to put you through that in the very beginning of the game and get you back out of it again? When we sort of reorganized our thinking to the Yama Kings coming to the walled city, that made it more plausible to send you there as an early run.
Yeah, and it's got the foreboding and stuff like that.
Yeah, I gotta say, the walled city tile set is like one of my favorite ones in the entire game. Because it looks like you're floating way up above.
Thank you very much, Tyler.
You're floating way up above stuff, and you could fall down in any of the cracks and get inside it. Yeah, it's like super gross, creepy.
Yeah, I think definitely one of the biggest challenges of that, doing the art for that area, was to make it feel like you really were on the roofs, but it was still over top of you, and it was just a giant tower of Jenga and filth that was just gonna fall on your face.
Jenga and Filth. It's gonna be your autobiography. Jenga and Filth.
That sounds great. Yeah. I can fill in some lines for that. But yeah, I deeply, deeply enjoyed doing that tile set. A lot of people might not know this, but the first game idea I ever pitched was for Kowloon Walled City, and so that I actually got to make it, and so it was pretty exciting for
That's
me.
a dream come true. And then from a gameplay point of view, Trevor built that one, and it didn't contain that little quest, right, where you go around with the feng shui.
Yeah, the bad chi, the introduction to that concept.
Yeah. And so that was a really interesting process also.
It was a late ad, wasn't it?
It was a very late ad, and it was Clementi who pointed out, the way it started was, he's just like, you know what, it feels a little empty of stuff to do. And I had been like ruminating on that with Trevor forever. It's like, we got to do something in here. This isn't right. And it was a matter of, there's gameplay, right, where you want something to do, but also how do we set the tone for the whole thing?
The idea of feng shui and all of that being a real world force comes directly from the pen and paper role playing game. Sort of what I tried to add into the mix, it was the idea of looking at why things were so bad in this particular location, and there maybe being more to it than it just being a natural phenomenon.
We're talking about the walled city. I think we should also talk about the guy who's running it, Strangler Bao.
Well, that was the mission.
Big badass. Yeah, we got to get to him, and
he's got some sweet tattoos and a cybernetic jaw. I am afraid of this man.
He also has a teddy bear.
He also does have a teddy bear on his bed.
The reason he has a teddy bear because I put a teddy bear in there back when it was the Magpie's room, when it was the Wampoa, and that room didn't change. Like, we never took the teddy bear back out of it.
What you meant was in Strangler Bao's backstory. When he was a kid, he had.
Welcome to game development, kids.
I don't know, I added some red lights in there.
Well, you created Bao.
Well, I mean, so the funny thing is, I mean, we talked about how initially this run was on the Wampoa. The basic structure of what you're supposed to be doing remained intact despite the location change. The core concept was you would take either Gobbet or Isabel, there would be magical or tech-based approaches based on who you took, and you were going to confront someone who had been getting too big for his or her britches, who kindly wanted a message delivered to. So we basically just took that concept and transposed it into the walled city and made it a Yellow Lotus lieutenant who'd gone rogue, and that is Bao, who, as people have pointed out, is a badass and has tattoos, and I think is wearing cargo shorts.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. And flip-flops, I believe.
Yeah.
This is how you know that this man is not afraid of anything.
Exactly.
Well, I think the important thing to note about that is that he is afraid of one thing, which is kindly. Like, he gets cowed by her in the end. Like, that he is this really imposing Lotus figure. He's a very powerful guy in the walled city, but at the end of the day, it takes one phone call from kindly, and he comes running.
Yeah.
So I think that's important to kind of sell kindly as that all-knowing, string-pulling, swear-engine figure.
It's part of the kindly intro.
Yeah, it's part of the whole
Absolutely.
thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's restaging this, making it focused on the Yellow Lotus and on the walled city, both helped to establish the walled city's presence in the story and to reinforce the character of Kindly Cheng. So it was a really good change.
Some fun stuff about the boat in Heoi, the Safeboat, as we called it. That's the dev-facing term. for that boat is the Safeboat.
Yes.
'Cause it wasn't a safe house; it was a safe boat. And
Naturally.
what's fun is I asked John Everest, our composer, to make a special song for that. And if you know, like, if you played Shadowrun Super Nintendo, there was this Otherworldly Canines track that really stood out, and for some people, pretty iconic of Shadowrun and video games in Shadowrun. And then that came along with us through a bit in Returns, and then the only place it played in Dragonfall was like this rearranged version of it in your safe house. So then John did another arrangement using that Otherworldly Canines theme still in the Safeboat, and it really it really sort of ties all the experience together, and you're just like, it's a really strong evocative track, and it was fun to sort of put that in there and sort of connect all that stuff together a little bit with the music.
I love the boat itself.
No, I will forever associate that music with life on the Big Texas.
That's right.
Great option. Yes. You got to have a Big Texas option.
Yeah, but there's a limit, isn't there, to how many times you can change the name before Gobbet gets mad at you?
Yeah, you can change the name as often as you want in Gobbet's sort of second trust level, but if you leave town on a Shadowrun and then come back and ask to change it again, she tells you no, she's already painted the name on the side of the boat, and she's not going to cut another stencil.
So one other thing I'd like to add about the Safeboat is that in this place, it felt like every crew member had their spot.
Yeah.
And it was particularly effective in revealing Raptor for the first time. And I really appreciated that. We should talk about our crew just a little bit.
Yeah, especially Raptor.
Yeah, how did you come up
changed?
with Raptor in the first place and all that kind of stuff?
Raptor was based on a pen and paper character that I played in the one and only game that Mike Mulvihill ran for us.
Oh my god, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. that is what I am.
Looking around the room. I thought you were going to start with a story about the creepy Russian roommate you had one time.
No, well,
I haven't heard the story, so now you have to tell it.
I wish there were a story.
There is no creepy Russian roommate.
There is no creepy Russian roommate. I did once take some Russian martial arts, which mostly involved getting beaten up by Russians. I had bruises that might have been a little closer to hematomas, and I didn't do well, but, good times. I mean, with Raptor, I knew that I wanted to make a rigor character, and I wanted to explore a little bit more of that sort of concept of essence loss and of sort of the synthesis of man and machine, and I wanted to play around with sort of the ideas that you see in all sorts of cyberpunk fiction of sort of what is the definition of human, all these really cool sort of transhumanist and posthumanist ideas that I can't take any real credit for. These are long pre-existing.
No, but he was a venue for you to
But he
explore
was a venue to explore these concepts, right? And that's something that I always like to do with characters. Yeah. So we ultimately decided that Raptor would be an optional teammate, but he's just the dude who lives on your boat. And if you're comfortable never talking to the dude who lives on your boat, that's perfectly fine.
But in Shadowrun, that really seems unwise.
And just messes around with his giant drone all the time.
Yeah, wouldn't you?
I am disinclined to interact with neighbors who have murder robots. Yes.
Just the simplest thing of when you walk down, when you go down to his area, he's not facing you, right? And just, you click on him and he turns around to face you, and for some reason it was really effective for me. It's like, all right, there's Raptor.
It has to do with, I know what you're talking about, and it has to do with his portrait.
Yeah.
Because he's sort of like got his head cocked a little bit.
Yeah, he's got that little look at his eye.
And then he's got like just a little bit of a shit-eating grin, like not full on, but just a hint of one, and it's sort of sparkle in his eye. And then if you approached a normal person in the dark from behind and were like, hey man, like they would shit themselves, and like Raptor's just like, what's going on, man?
Tyler uses the word disinclined to mess with people robots, but like Raptor is like disinclination embodied. Like he's just completely detached. So he's just like, he's just doing his work and you're just merely interrupting him. So it's not as much of a frightening situation as it is It's just a nuisance. He's like,
Yeah.
who is this?
Can I help
And
you?
that makes him interesting right away.
I think this is a really important time where we can point out the work of Joel Duquet, who was our character lead, and who did a lot of those great character portraits. You know, so the portrait for Raptor, the portrait for Gaichu, you know, it's just lovely. And you know, we went through a couple of portraits for Kindly, and I had some character reference, but he found exactly the idea I was going for, and it is from Kung Fu Hustle. The woman with the curlers in Kung Fu Hustle.
The landlady.
Yeah, the landlady. And he put her in without telling me, and so so I'm just playing Kindly, and one day she pops up. It's like, oh my God, this is... And I ran over and I hugged him, and I think I kind of kissed him.
Grendel, which is called Outsider in the final version. The genesis of that mission was that Andrew had come up with a general idea for how he wanted Gaichu to join the party. And it involved basically CSI Hong Kong type behavior. And I was like, all right, well, let's see if I can make a mission where it's possible to do the entire thing without firing a single shot and have it be interesting. And the practical upshot of that is, oh my God, there was a lot of writing that I had to do on that. And the second upshot is, this Whampoa place is very multicultural. I think we'll put a lot of backers in here because it's a good place for expatriates to go. So it was fun to break that up into lots of little small chunks, like the various shops, and have that sort of like police procedural plot arc. Where you'd go and investigate something and then go quiz somebody on what you'd learned and then go investigate a new thing. I think I was thinking a lot about playing Call of Cthulhu and Delta Green at the same time. But one of the things that I think really makes that mission for me is the horrible wash of neon everywhere. And the fact that everything is bright and shiny. And it's like, oh my God, assault on my eyes because this looks like Hong Kong. Yes!
Mm-hmm. Well, there was a definite sense of place in that mission. That's for sure.
It's a real
That was
place.
one of
You
the
can
first
go there.
missions to really like fully come together from my memory, which is incomplete at best. But I remember playing Grendel and just feeling like the combination of the writing and the like you said, the sort of investigative gameplay and the Hong Kong visuals. Like, oh yeah, I feel like I'm playing Shadowrun Hong Kong. That's pretty cool.
Well, Tyler deserves a lot of props for building it because he both built it and wrote the entire thing, and the challenge in doing that, because from my perspective of playing through it, like there are so many stages to it where like I remember playing through it twice and not getting, in my idea, the ideal outcome of no shots fired. And I would keep going over to Tyler's desk and poking him on the shoulder. I was like, but I did this, and I talked to this person, and I found this thing. How come I didn't get it? And he's like, well, you missed things. There's still stuff there. And so...
Like a detective.
Yeah, there were so many layers to it, and there's so many different outcomes that just the sheer, challenge of building that thing and the fact that it landed so nicely, and it is one of the better missions in the game, I truly think. Like, that was awesome. Like, really.
The thing that interests me is the collaboration between Andrew and Tyler, in that Andrew created Gaichu. Tyler wrote a lot of Gaichu.
Well, Tyler was the writer of Gaichu. I mean,
That's amazing to me that somebody could create a character that somebody else writes. What was that like for you to pick up on that?
Well, you hand me a samurai as a character, and as somebody who majored in Japanese studies, I'm going to take it and I'm going to run with it as far as I fucking can.
Yeah, see, that's good resource management.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like on the one hand, I was sad not to write the character, but on the other hand, I very quickly came to realize that Tyler was the right person to write this character.
Yeah.
He was better equipped to write Gaichu than I ever could have been, so...
And it's good to eat man flesh every once in a while.
Well, especially if you marinate it in some nice soy and dashi stuff.
I think we should jump in here and talk about one of the things, like little Easter eggs with Duncan, and how if you go into Gaichu's room when he's not there and you eat something, what's the other place? And Duncan says a line, and then what's the other place?
I believe what Duncan says is like, is this who we are now? We go on a mission, we break into a strange place, and you eat their dinner? What's wrong with you?
Exit stage left,
exit stage left is the connection to that.
And you can drink something off of the liquor cabinet and exit stage left.
Yeah, and Duncan's just like...
And Duncan just does not know what is wrong with you.
Yeah, and that only happens if Duncan is there for both of those. It's just like, you're just the person
You're a food-crazy beast.
Yeah.
There's something we did with Isabel. We'll get to that later.
Yeah, but it speaks like to the maturity of the editor and the tool we were working in, is we could quickly throw those things in without too much cost. And if you do hit that very specific case of having those people, it's nice to be able to add that.
To be fair, we don't have any QA team members here.
Yeah.
well, really quickly though, one thing that is great about being a small team in earshot and working with a game and a tool that is not like it's just you come up with an idea to like connect something in a fun way to another mission, and just like two people can solve that in like 20 minutes.
Yeah.
It's not like, all right, we got to get the animation lead in here and then the voice acting people, and then we have to see like a producer to look about rearranging the schedule to see like that's something fun about doing something where everything is text based and the team is small, and you can just sort of, when those sort of small inspirations hit you, we're actually able to take advantage of that stuff. So that's one thing that was pretty fun about working on all the Shadowrun projects in that respect.
Yeah, once we understood the voices of the characters, a lot of different people were touching all the different characters, and just understanding this is an appropriate line for Duncan to say. Example, that's cool as hell.
This was the first mission that Andrew and I had worked on, but really like in tandem to kind of plan exactly what we wanted to do. And Andrew came in with a very solid idea of what he wanted to do with the mission, which was we wanted to kind of invert the traditional trust mission, where rather than relying on your compatriots' strengths, that you would have to kind of bail them out of the situation in which their weaknesses were kind of amplified.
Yeah, that was sort of the core concept, and Trevor was actually part of the plannings for that mission as well. Something that we sort of wanted to play with in SRHK was the idea of, for one, sort of playing against type with the characters in their trust missions. So Gobbet is a very lighthearted character, so we went heavy on her trust mission. Isabel is a much more self-serious character, so we decided to make that the comedy mission, and to put her in a situation that she was completely ill-equipped for. She is very competent in the Matrix, and she's competent in a firefight. Social situations, not so much. I thought it would be fun to try sort of a Cyrano de Bergerac scenario where you have to talk her through increasingly difficult social situations.
Yeah, and that worked out well because we, myself and Andrew, had also worked on a mission prior to that we were kind of noodling with an idea where you would actually have teammates in separate areas of the map that you'd be working with, and so we were able to bring that into this mission where you basically have two completely different squads kind of doing things they're in tandem and in parallel, but they're not happening at the same time. So that kind of landed pretty well too, that you got to see different parts of the area and you kind of felt very much exposed and vulnerable, which kind of heightened the whole be charismatic, everything is good here, the Han Solo moment of everything's fine, we're all fine here, just try to keep things running smoothly because you are vulnerable, and if a fight does break out, you're going to have to react quickly and it's going to be kind of a shit show. And so from a gameplay perspective, it was heightened and kind of amped that way too, which worked out really well. But the DECCON setting was just something we kind of landed on of we wanted to have a mission where there was a lot of deckers around and she was trying to retrieve some data, and then we landed on this idea.
Yeah, well, I think that, so we were talking about some of the trust missions feeling more like actual Shadowruns, and this is one of the ones where, it's like, well, okay, this is going to feel a bit like a run, but we don't want it to be yet another hit on another corporate building.
Really fun environment, though, that was realized really well.
Yeah,
Zach Hartlich did a great job on that.
So Zach was originally did content managing, put all of the props in and everything for us, which was really nice, and then he
stepped up for that
stepped
mission.
up, and now he does environment stuff too.
Yeah.
And did a really, really cool job of DECCON. I was originally going to do it, and then he grabbed it, and I was really happy because I just got to see a badass convention of deckers, people who you don't normally see in the real world, kind of be on this floor and do all the cool different, which I'm sure Tyler was really nerding out about, all the different
technical vendors.
Technical vendors and stuff from all of the Shadowrun lore. So I think that was just a really nice visual treat for people who are really into the lore and got to see all that kind of thing. And awesome, cool lighting that really sold the feel of the convention. Some cool little, what was that?
Perfect persona.
Perfect persona.
Yeah, he really built up that kiosk that the mission kind of hinges around, where you're connected to that kiosk. And so, a lot of work went in technically to kind of make the mission come together, where the camera is switching between these two different squads, and I spent a lot of time making that happen, with some frustration. But it came together really nicely, where you have these moments where you're jumping between the different parts of the mission, and it's kind of spinning two plates and just making sure everything is going well.
Yeah, you fought an epic battle against our camera system. Well done.
Slayed the beast, but yeah.
The dialogue portion where you're jumping between Isabel and the main character, and whatever your responses are to one person, Isabel
parrots it.
It's just
She
like
parrots it.
I didn't know what was going on
And
the first time that happened.
That
I
was
like,
Andrew's idea.
Just fuck off, guy. All right, just leave. And she's just like, just fuck off, guy. Leave.
I was so concerned about it, because jumping with the camera was going to be so tough. But Andrew's like, we got to have a scenario where you're having a conversation while Isabel's having a conversation, and you can't say things freely to her, and you have to respond to somebody else. And it just became this beautiful moment where, like, there are two conversations, but only one speaker, and it came across
you have
really
to stop
well.
and try to find the option that satisfies them both.
Yeah, like, exactly.
Yeah,
it's like when you're on a phone conversation in a room with someone, and you're trying to answer two people at once.
Yeah, it was kind of tricky to write, but I'm really happy with how it turned out.
Yeah, and it's also one of the missions in the game where you can fly through that mission without firing a shot.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
And we did a lot of work where you could just kind of we dropped in backers. It's got a lot of life and vibrance to it. Andrew threw in some backstories and some fun little tidbits with like the noodle extruder. If you do explore with Isabel on the second floor, you can read some emails that are very intriguing.
Yeah, the mythology of the noodle extruder is something that was born from one of the pieces of environment art that went into the game, and we wound up with this extra terminal, and it's like, well, this terminal has some emails in it.
Yeah.
We don't know what they're about. Noodle extruder, go.
Yeah, so I was rid of that.
I also want to thank Connor for providing me with the opportunity to write the world's sketchiest drug dealer in the bathroom.
Bathroom dealer.
Who's got a grocery bag full of loose pills and syringes.
He thinks that you basically.
That came down to Trevor, who Trevor handles a lot of the economy type stuff and a lot of the item stuff. I think we just said, like, we need to create some unique items that you can buy on runs, and so I was like, well, what do you have left over? He's like, well, I have some drugs that I haven't gotten a place for yet. And so I was like, oh, well, I don't know, big gathering of people, public bathroom, drug dealer. So I just threw a shady drug dealer in there, and I left the dialogue basically completely blank, other than the fact that he had a mistaken, misconnection. He thinks you're somebody else there for a drug buy, and then everything else was just Andrew building out this really, really shifty dude in a bathroom at a convention of thousands of people trying to sell you snack.
You did primary source research for this one, right?
Oh, I did. Actually, funny story. I left the office one night and went to the grocery store to get dinner, food for my family, and had to use the restroom, stepped into the restroom, and walked into this was a Bellevue high-end grocery store. There was a drug deal going down 7 p.m. on a weeknight.
That's exactly what this whole setup was.
Yeah, absolutely.
So.
Misdirection started life in my brain based on a simple thing that I always wanted to do in a tabletop game, which is all these Shadowrunners live and work in the same spheres in whatever city they're based in, but they never seem to run into each other when they're after the same thing. And I thought, hey, what might be fun is if we could have a mission where you run into another team of Shadowrunners and have to negotiate with them based on what they want, what you want, and maybe go out shooting together, so to speak. And since we had some backers that I know personally, I thought, hey, I'll throw these guys and lady into this mission that I'm making and try and do their characters justice, as I'm somewhat familiar with all of their personalities and what they were up to. The reason that it was Ares is we've had a number of Shadowruns throughout the other two games, and I don't think we've ever had anyone shoot at Ares specifically, only at their security branch, Knight Errant. I thought, let's go get a laser. Lasers are awesome. Yeah, stealing a laser is what's going to happen.
Yeah, and that gave us the opportunity to put a laser weapon in the game and have a justifiable reason, like why you never seen a laser in any of the other Shadowrun games, and give us a cool moment to get it from a corporation rather than just buying it in a shop or having some guy just give it to you.
Lasers are fairly rare on the ground in Shadowrun, so it made more sense than a fixer just stumbling onto it. One of the other cool things about that kind of mission is that it let us continue to play with the ridiculousness of taking Gaichu anywhere and allowing you to get Gaichu past the front in a particular set of circumstances if you had particular skills is something that I wanted to do.
That gag never gets old.
It might, but it didn't at that time. I figured since there was a bounty on ghouls, that was an established feature of the Shadowrun universe, and Ares is known for hiring more Shadowrunners than any other mega corporation. Being able to show up with a ghoul and either say, oh, this is a guy that I'm turning in for a bounty, or, we're freelancers, let us upstairs, we've got a meeting with Mr. Johnson, and have the security guards be like, oh, well, okay, sure, this is like the third time this week. I thought that would be a fun kind of way to get upstairs, because that's a little white lie. I mean, you are Shadowrunners.
Isn't there a tie-in if you bring him and Ractor?
Yeah, Ractor claims that Gaichu is actually one of his bio-drone experiments, and also his bodyguard. Ractor is not above lying through his teeth to get whatever the hell he wants.
Yeah, I think the mission's interesting from the perspective of like having the other runners there and being able to kind of interact with them, and there's also just some sort of vestigial stuff that's in the mission itself, which is like, I remember this kind of mission serves a surrogate role for like what would be Ractor's trust mission.
Yeah.
And so there's kind of a lot of contingencies about how you enter this mission from the hub, and if you talk to Ractor, if he's on your crew. And so I know that you and Andrew dealt a lot, I'm talking to Tyler, dealt a lot with how to set the mission up properly so everything didn't explode.
Yeah, that was a nest of vipers that got very tangled.
Yeah, and then also I remember kind of one of our older design implementations of having kind of like a running gauge of how infamous you were in the game, and the runners were going to react to that.
Yeah.
Like if you were kind of a podunk runner at this time, like if you took this mission really early, they'd kind of try to kick you around a bit, but now we've kind of, it almost defaults to like, they're almost in awe of you because you work with kindly and because you are well known, and so I know that's one of the things that you were kind of working around as well.
Yeah, there's some conversation spurs that I had to delete just because they were going to, Bull and Opti and all them were going to say some mean stuff if you were earlier in the game and less well established, but based on how we shuffled the missions around, it's like, no, let's have them show you some respect, because who doesn't want to be respected as a Shadowrunner for doing awesome stuff?
Well, it also speaks to some of the earlier overall concepts we had about face and
the Huan Chi and just the different mechanics we wanted to kind of gauge your progress through the game in. But a lot of it ultimately evolved into just kind of a narrative couching for a lot of how people interacted with you. So
here's a fun fact about the design of Misdirection as well. Misdirection is the reason there's adept AI in the game. There was not adept AI in the game until this mission because there was no real need for it, since no one had any adept NPCs in the previous.
Yeah, it was mostly just melee weapons.
But since Amelia Von Hayden's character, a wonderful woman who works at Riot and used to work at BioWare, since her character was an adept, I was like, well, I can't put Amelia in the game and not give her AI. That would be very terrible. I don't want her character to be an idiot. So we had to write up some AI, and the way that ended up being structured is it just worked out that the adept AI doesn't take cover. It charges at you and always buffs if it has something that's not on cooldown, so that it can keep a constant stream of awesome ass kickery going.
Yeah. And it actually worked out pretty well as it got applied later to some of the missions towards the end of the game. Like I used that Gumbo, that AI script that Tyler wrote for the kind of crazed civilians that are under the influence of Qian Ya in the final mission of the game, or the penultimate mission of the game. So it got multiple uses throughout the game once it was built, actually. So it was nice.
Exit Stage Left was the first mission I designed at Hairbrain Schemes, and the mandate was generally make something small that you can iterate on quickly, and it should be one of the smaller side missions. I was like, all right, well, what places do I like in real life in Hong Kong? Well, I really like Repulse Bay because it reminds me of Hollywood with all of the attendant douchebags. I know, let's send Shadowrunners to a party put on by Hong Kong's version of Hollywood. This couldn't possibly go wrong. And the connection to the reveal in that mission is basically due to the fact that I've played a lot of Vampire the Masquerade, and I love terrible vampire concepts. Like, people who should not, under any circumstance, be a vampire.
And just to our friends at White Wolf, that Vampire the Masquerade is not a terrible vampire concept.
But people who get inducted into the Sabbat and happen to be like burger flippers have no place being vampires, and that's what makes them awesome.
Yes.
So the idea was, I really wanted to bring back some characters from a tabletop Hong Kong game that I ran in about 2002 to 2003.
Nerd.
And one of them was Dr. Shen Yang, who was played by my very good friend Bill, who sticks in my mind as like one of the more insane characters that I've ever seen in a game. So I was like, all right, this has to be a job for Dr. Shen Yang. You've got to go to this party because he can't go, but there should be this implication that maybe he caused the problem in the first place because he's really not as good of a producer, but a much more ruthless producer than his rival.
I wrote some of the dialogue for Dr. Shen Yang, and Tyler described him to me as an Asian Danny DeVito.
Accurate.
That whole character of Shen Yang was sold on the description of the handshake that you have with him.
Yeah.
That's everything.
The boneless, the moist, boneless, limpy hand. That it repulsed me physically when I read it, and I was like, this character's amazing.
Yeah, and uncomfortably flaccid handshake.
First of all, anytime in a game you could use the word flaccid and moist, you got something going on.
I got to use the words flaccid and boneless ham in the same paragraph.
Yeah, and that's really why you go to school, you know?
Yeah.
Andrew is also responsible for solving the problem that became kind of a recurring gag with Gaichu, which is how do you take Gaichu to places where you're not overtly murdering people, because he is very visibly not human and there's a bounty on ghouls in Shadowrun. And Andrew's response was, well, it's movie stars, all right? Let's put them in makeup. Here, I'll just cook up some TV show concepts, like Chop Chop Chef.
Yeah.
Like, these are all genius. Holy crap, I want to see these shows.
Yeah.
Just really quick, Andrew, what was the theme for Chop Chop Chef?
It was Chomp Chomp Kitchen, and it was a ghoul celebrity chef who killed and ate other celebrity chefs. But Gaichu then chimed in and said, but only the uptight ones, I have a code.
Right. We got to get to Heidi Klum with this idea.
Yeah.
Well, that's something that we went back to in Isabel's mission as well, where everyone just assumes that he's cosplaying.
Yeah.
And it's sort of... you know, there's one of two ways you can play that, trying to take a ghoul that obviously does not belong in a social situation and put him in one. You could either have everyone scream and attack or run away, or you could play it as a joke and go the other direction. And I think it's more fun to
Well, it's the human reaction, right?
Yeah.
The human reaction to most things in shock is bewilderment and not fear. It's like, huh?
I don't understand this.
Yeah, exactly.
I gotta give Spencer a call out too for the awesome rooftop tile set.
Absolutely.
Because nothing says awesome like having a kung fu fight with a vampire in a rooftop garden at a party.
Well, but then Tristan also gets a lot of credit too for having the parallax backdrop of the city
where
of
you
Hong
can
Kong
see
below,
Hong Kong down below, all
which
the
is
other
really important.
Repulse Bay resorts.
Because the only reason you know you're on a rooftop is you have the reference of the lower city below it, so that was also great to have in there.
Yeah, you want to talk about that a little bit, Spencer? You spent, I know we did a lot of iteration.
There was a lot of rooftops combined with gardens in this game, yeah, for sure. There was a lot of back and forth. I got a great concept from Chris Rogers, who was the art director at the time, and I just went with it and I ran, and it ended up being a pretty cool set, and I'm really happy with it. And yeah, like Connor said, Tristan was able to make that cool backdrop, and I think in general Shadowrun Hong Kong had a lot of really, really interesting things that we were able to do with art that we hadn't done in previous games, like the lighting and the giant facade of the walled city and the backdrop of the skyline. It's all really cool stuff. So
Very.
yeah, very cool.
I really love the
We
process.
pushed the engine pretty close to its breaking.
So many lights.
I did a
Oh
lot
my
of things that the engine couldn't handle, just trying to push it to its breaking point, and we did several times. We
Yeah,
had to pull
success on
back.
breaking. Well,
Yeah.
that's the way you do it, right?
Pull it back, break it again.
With the Gaichu Trust mission, one of the things we wanted to try was to give the player more opportunity to set a trap for the Red Samurai, to kind of give them an arena where they can prepare and know who they're up against, and have like a ticking clock counting down to be like, all right, the guys that you're gonna kill are gonna be here, and have it less be about pressure and more be about like letting the player do their thing and kind of try to set up what their most powerful setup is going to be to take down the Red Samurai. So we came up with a couple things, like trapping one of them and killing them before they can even get into the fight. We thought that would be a cool thing to let the player have, and also to convey kind of that the Red Samurai are really powerful and unstoppable if they're working together, but if you kind of throw a wrench in that, you can do a lot better in a fight against them.
Yeah, I've seen a number of players say, these Red Samurai, they don't seem as badass as they were made out to be. I mean, I set up the ambush and I cut them apart, and I was like, yeah, that's kind of the point of the mission. If you manage to separate the team that works great as a single unit into individual people, they will not be able to cover their own butts, and you can murder them because you are working as a team with Gaichu, somebody that you have worked with for a long period of time, in order to solve his problem. And one of the things that was interesting about the mission is there was a lot less dialogue in it than there were in a lot of other missions. And I had a plan initially to write a bunch of dialogue for the various Red Samurai leading up to the fight, but there was just no rational way that I could figure out where they would even converse with someone without opening fire. That's just not the kind of organization that they are. If they see a threat, they'll try and kill it. And that's really, I think, comes across when as soon as the alarm gets released, they all just run in like, safety off, weapons free, let's murderize, oh god, we're dying now. But the whole crux of it, I think, is the final conversation between Gaichu and Ishida, where they sort of go back and forth about, who's in the right and who's in the wrong, and ties into Gaichu's morality or lack thereof, because the entire character is based on the ambiguity of who he is, who he's been, and who he is becoming. And I really didn't want to moralize one way or the other than to point out, here's some horrible stuff that you've done. Well, here's some horrible stuff that you've done. Well, now I'm going to turn you into a ghoul, or now I'm going to kill you. Neither of these are particularly good solutions, but they are necessary solutions. It's the final showdown in a samurai movie. Two people are diametrically opposed. Someone will die. There's probably no good solution to this. There's only a satisfactory solution, which is a very Shadowrun concept in the first place. Like, sometimes the best you can do is break even and not be dead.
And see Sanjuro.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, for that final sword stroke.
But yeah, no, one of the things I wanted to point out that I really enjoyed is Tyler did such a fantastic job of building up the backstory of Gaichu and kind of lending credence to that idea of the fact that these samurai are in a weakened state because they're not operating as an optimal unit. Like, in his backstory, he talks about getting trapped at the subway station back in Japan and having to fight his way out of there. But the key point of that story is that they overestimate themselves and underestimate Gaichu, and they don't understand the lack of having his skills as a close combat master is what allows him to even be alive and be on your team, is they overestimate themselves. And the same thing happens again. And so it's kind of like that poetic, like, if you keep overestimating yourself and underestimating your enemy, you're going to lose every single battle, which is why you kill the samurai again, is that they've now, two of their legs have been kicked out. Both Gaichu and whoever you select to kind of isolate just makes the fight all that much easier.
There was actually a moment where I was testing that level that played out really well, where I'd been playing an orc combat decker with a butt ton of cyberware, and I brought along Duncan and Ractor and Gaichu on that. And I have Gaichu positioned off to the side of the front doors that they run in if you don't hack anything in the Matrix, with everybody else just hanging back with all of their long-range gear. And as soon as people ran in, everybody starts getting cut apart. And Ishida ran forward after being severely weakened. I had Gaichu on Overwatch. As soon as he stepped through the threshold, Gaichu just steps forward and goes, whoop! Sword blow, 27 damage. Oh, you're down. Just like single chop to the chest. It's like, that was poetic. That's kind of hard for an isometric game, but I'm happy with that.
So the sinking ship was a tougher one in terms of building that. There was just a lot of different things coming online at that time in the project.
She was a hard character to figure out too. I mean,
we struggled with her maturity and her responsibility a lot because of her age, and that's something that changed a lot through the mission, or through as I was building it. So if you want to talk about that,
yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, there were earlier drafts of the mission and Gobbet's story where there was some more personal tragedy involved.
A family.
There was there was a draft where there was a family involved that maybe she left behind on the sinking ship. Right. Sort of playing with the idea of Rat driving her to, run at the first sign of trouble, to just sort of leave her problems behind because that's the smart thing to do. But that did a couple of things. One, with this particular team, we needed someone to be, that you could really be a buddy with, kind of like Diedrich was in Dragonfall. We needed somebody who was unquestionably on your side. Gobbet had to fill that role, and if we made her a family abandoner, that could possibly cause
it makes her impeachable.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, and then the other thing was, if we really treaded heavily in that personal tragedy angle, it ran the risk of making the mission way too much like Glory's story from Dragonfall, and that was something we did not want to do. Yeah. There were already thematic elements that were similar. It's going up against a cultish environment that is isolated, and you're going up against a spirit being of some kind. Magic is heavily involved.
There are some baubles you have to grab.
Exactly. There were already a number of similarities. We did not want to have that additional story similarity in addition. So for a whole variety of reasons, that was the wrong call. And, it's like, thankfully we were able to step away from that and bring Gobbet back in line with what she really needed to be and what we wanted her to be.
And when we created her in the first place, it was for a completely different story.
It was.
Right, in a completely different city. And then when we went to Hong Kong, we transferred her over. But originally, she was created to be a guide for you, who was, what's the word you used all the time? An untrustworthy guy.
She
was Gollum.
She was an untrustworthy narrator in very early drafts of actually a different story, right? In addition, there was this whole idea of her totem Rat taking a much more active role in the story. It's like in the very earliest drafts of outlining, you kind of throw everything, including the kitchen sink, into the mix, and then you start pulling stuff out when you realize there's too much bloat.
And so on the mission, quickly, we had an idea, and Andrew had this idea just in his mind of this slum floating in the middle of the bay, just lashed together, so we had these shipping containers, and I was able to mock together what it looked like, but then Tristan came in along with Zach and was able to really pull the mission together into like this floating, just kind of just dirt pile, this trash pile of just all these different things collected, and that very much fits with the rat totem thing. And we wanted the mission to kind of feel like an uneasy homecoming where you get to actually interact with the people a little bit more, because there are examples in previous Shadowruns of doing that. But this was a place where you could actually just have conversations with people about long-term history, about when she was there, and you could use that against them, and that kind of uneasy feeling, that uneasy guide thing actually landed in this mission, even though it didn't make it into Gobbet's character, as those kind of locals on the boat are like, yeah, come with us, and it all seems very hunky-dory. They're playing it off as it is, but like you can look around and see how messed up things are, and so there's different options you can take in that mission to kind of be skeptical of them or not.
I really felt like I was awash at sea playing that.
Yeah, and so that was, again, Will's new water, and like the blooming fires and stuff worked out really well, and then you get into the kind of danker, just dingier under parts of the ship, and it worked out really well, where it wasn't with quite the branching nature of Grendel, the Gaichu join mission, but it did have kind of a way you could go around and connect with people and talk to people and get background on the ship and what happened. But yeah, it was a fun mission to put together, and it was easy to actually drop a hook in for a different mission, which was that, again, the character voices coming through. There's a section in the beginning of the mission where there's a pump you have to interact with, and if you have intelligence, you can bypass the fuse, and it ends up exploding. And I knew that Isabel was going to be there, and Isabel's a very kind of observational, matter-of-fact person. She's been running with you for some time at this point, and it's kind of that whole Shadowrun thing of, you go to these places where you're a stranger and you just blow stuff up all the time. And so I was like, someone has to comment on that eventually. And so I wrote this little line of dialogue, which was Isabel saying, why is it wherever we go you blow shit up? And you're like, it's not my fault. And then we kind of tied that into later missions as well, and actually with the Isabel Trust mission, if you set off a sprinkler and you hand her this this ruined outfit that she has to wear for the rest of the mission, she's like, why did you can't do anything right the first time, you ruin everything, I have this soaking wet uniform. And it was just these fun things of like, you have to laugh at like what Shadowrunning is sometimes.
Like ruin it or make it more fun.
Yeah, but it is a lot of fun to ruin it. And that's why we throw them in there. We have to build those options because that's what Shadowrunning is like all of her lessons are about like we had this horrible situation that went completely, haywire and we managed to pull it out and it was a really funny story at the end.
The term for this is pink mohawk versus black trench coat.
Yeah.
I have 3 rules when I'm running tabletop Shadowrun games. And those 3 rules are your Johnson will likely screw you over, and sometimes there is no way out that is good. There's only survive or do something insane. Second rule is that if there's an opportunity to go land on a cargo ship and steal stuff from a cargo ship, I'm going to make a run around it. And the third rule is that Tir Tarangier sucks. Because their ruling class are a bunch of crazed fascists. So that was the basis for Whistleblower. I was like, I think I'm going to make a run where you have to jack some stuff from a freighter in the middle of a thunderstorm, and the guy that hired you is going to double cross you, and there's going to be a third complication where basically there's no way out other than ending up getting paid less than you were promised and losing some face, or murdering everyone, because murdering everyone should generally be an option in Shadowrun games. It may not be the best option, but it should always be an option.
I wholeheartedly agree.
So, in terms of setting up the freighter itself, I wanted to experiment with stealth, so to speak. Not real stealth, because there's no way to message that effectively in our engine, but sort of breach and clear swarm tactics like you would find on a search and seizure mission on a ship. So the way that I ended up explaining that is, in a thunderstorm, these guys aren't going to be able to shout for help very effectively. The thunder and waves will drown out what they're doing, so they would have to run to actual intercoms on the ship to raise the alarm ship-wide. That gives players the opportunity to gun them down before they can effectively communicate this to the bridge, meaning that clearing the top deck could be accomplished either by not being seen by these people on their patrol routes, or by murdering them very quickly and having no one left alive to raise the alarm. It was also a way to explore the voluntary turn mode feature addition that we had, because I don't think at that point in development we had very many missions where there were opportunities to engage turn mode on your own wherewithal, rather than having it engaged automatically by combat. So I was like, let's see if we can play around with that.
So it turns out it's equally as stealthy to sneak past as it is to go guns blazing, as long as you don't let anybody press the button.
Swift murder is a kind of stealth. If there's no one left alive to say help me, then I would say that would be considered sneaky.
And any fan of a stealth game would know that.
There's some dialogue in there too that's keyed off of like if an alarm was raised.
Yep.
When you get to the bottom deck.
Yeah. If the alarm is raised on the top deck, when you reach the bottom decks, all of the soldiers that are down there are arrayed, waiting for you with guns drawn, just like, when that door opens, we are filling whatever is on the other side of that door with lead. But if the alarm isn't raised, all their positions are different, and you can draw some of them away with a fake fire alarm and stuff like that. There's just a way to shake up the kind of approach that players will have to the mission. So, person A on their first playthrough might have a wildly different experience than person B. It's also a mission that is possible, at least the first part of the mission is entirely possible to do without firing a single shot. Much like Outsider, the Gaichu recruitment mission. I was also really happy with the Chung Village look too, because the whole showdown area is actually patterned after a real place.
I remember looking over and seeing you on Google Street View, scrolling through Chung Village.
The only thing that's missing is the haunted television studio with the graffiti all over it, and the area that the fight takes place in is an amalgamation of 2 different areas in Chung Village. But I think it sells the idea of that sort of more rural side of Hong Kong that still has multi-story buildings, but feels more empty than the more ritzy areas of Central or Admiralty. The goal of the mission, the the MacGuffin that drives the plot is some research data and tissue samples that were spawned by an illustration in the first and second edition Shadowrun book Shadowtech of a horribly mutated monster known only as Omega 358G. Just a random throwaway illustration that Andrew really liked. And I was like, okay, sure, that'll be the thing that you have to get samples from and then destroy, because the elves don't want this research out on the market. Yeah, I like the ability to reveal that your Johnson is not only lying to you about who he is and what he wants. Pretty much the only thing he's not lying to you about is the research. He wants the research and the data. And it's fun to have a face-off between people that would not normally come in contact with each other under any circumstance.
Yeah, it's a great face-off.
A Solpa Ring and Tir Tarangir covert operatives from the Information Secretariat don't generally cross paths all that often. But the fun part about that was being able to set up different teams with different specialties. Like the Tsunami mercenaries have a lot of heavy firepower, a couple of adepts, but only like one mage, whereas the Solpa Rings are like really heavy on drones and riggers and heavily cybered individuals, just because Solpa Rings are known for being very technologically adept and relying a lot on that kind of technology.
And I always love seeing how many of the other team you can get them to kill each other.
Yeah. It's a reasonable plan of actually, I'll side with one of you, and you guys go first. You want it? You better go fight him first. I'll hang back here and snipe him.
Yeah, it was a good way to introduce some other factions that are minor kind of in the Hong Kong context, but they have interest in Hong Kong. There's ports running all through there, and they're going to be really interested in that stuff. But the game's not about Tir Tarangir, but we can still have them show up in an interesting way.
Yeah, and unlike in most portrayals of Tir Tarangir, they're not immortal elves, they're not high and mighty, they're not unassailable figures. They're simply people with pointy ears that want something that you have, and one of the ways that you can solve that problem is to put lead in their head.
Yeah. And it kind of has that Shadowrunner feel, because I'm a very aggressive player when I play Shadowrun. I pretty much shoot everything and blow everything up and yell at everybody. And so in the first part of the mission in Scene 1, when you're on the container ship and you get the call on the intercom, from the kind of third party that you're like unaware of who this person is. Tyler wrote in, and I don't know if it ended up shipping.
It shipped.
It ended up having one of the best moments of dialogue in the entire game, which is like very often you have these kind of elusive big bad guys yelling at you and telling you all these different things, and I'm always sitting there like going like, but I have a big gun too. And so there's this one line of dialogue where the guy's like, I'm gonna come after you, I'm gonna take you out.
I'll paint Heoi red with the blood of your friends.
And you can just tell him, get fucked, and hang up on him. And that's amazing. Like, that's what I would do personally if I was in that scenario and I was a Shadowrunner, so I loved that part of it. And then you get to the second scene of the mission, and you have this kind of double-cross, three-way fight scenario, and they're both kind of vying for your temporary loyalty. No, give me the MacGuffin and side with me. No, you side with me and I won't kill you. And you can just kind of throw birds to the wind and say, I'm going to kill every single one of you for messing with me. No one double-crosses me. No one demands anything from me. And then you engage in, which is if you do that, you engage in what is probably one of the hardest fights in the entire Hong Kong game, because you're completely outnumbered and surrounded. And so it was just a great moment for me to like have to pay for my stupid decisions and try to dig myself out of the hole that I had built for myself. And I love those moments in Shadowrun.
I think it's rewarding when you can go, you know what, I'm going to do something totally stupid, and then you do it and you're like, yeah, bitches, you are all dead.
And you pull it off.
Rad.
Yeah, and it's the sort of stuff that like Gobbet talks about in her Trust Dialogue, which is like, Shadowruns are a lot of bad decisions stacking up, and then probably people dying, and hopefully not you being those people, and somehow getting by the skin of your teeth. And that mission very much felt like that, where it is a lot of lies compounded and mystery compounded, and then it explodes at the end.
The uninvited guests, the infamous Shangri-La restaurant.
Yeah, uninvited guests. So Uninvited Guests was the first mission that I authored at Hairbrained on Shadowrun. So that was a pretty cool experience for me, and I kind of had a lot of different inspirations for it, but I really just kind of pulled something from one of the kind of pieces of documentation that the team had built in pre-production, which was just different run concepts and different cool places within Shadowrun. And I also had to do a lot of reading up on the Shadowrun universe and learning about Hong Kong because I was not super familiar with it at the time. And so ultimately I decided I definitely wanted to do some sort of extraction kidnapping. I thought that was a really cool idea, and I found this thing in the universe of Shadowrun, which was the Shangri-La floating restaurant, which is mirrored after modern day Jumbo Kingdom, which is in Aberdeen Harbor as well, in Hong Kong. And so I was like, that seems like an awesome place to have a shootout. It is on a floating neon eyesore in the middle of a harbor in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
Like, there's almost nothing more Hong Kong than that.
Well, if you hadn't picked a run to do there, I was going to.
Yeah,
So it was like inevitable.
It was inevitable that it was going to happen. So I did a bunch of research, and I worked pretty closely with Spencer to kind of build up kind of a visual idea of what we wanted it to be. And at the end of the day, I just wanted it to be this really gaudy, touristy eyesore of this neon kind of mess floating in the water. And I think we got pretty close to that. So
that was definitely a fun set to put together. There was a sort of a restriction, an unwritten restriction on how kitschy we could get with our Hong Kong wall sets and props and stuff like that, but we kind of threw that out the door with this mission, just because it needed to be like a tourism.
Yeah, and that's how it's written in the canon of the universe, and that's how Jumbo Kingdom is in real life. And so we got to kind of run with that a little bit, and we have just this very crimson kind of saccharine wallpaper that's just like too much, and the very kind of traditional statuaries and all of the neon. It's just this really clashing of modern and old, and it's kind of a cool experience.
It actually reminds me that my friend Jeff had taken reference photos of the Jumbo Kingdom restaurant for us because he was living in China at the time, but a lot of his reference photos involved him like walking up to tanks with crabs in them and like leaning over taking pictures of crabs and just like random objects in there. Like, that's actually surprisingly useful for making props.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just a very strange hybrid of traditional Chinese and Eastern kind of art and design with all of the horrible Hong Kong sensibilities of modernism, and it's
the
just
exterior of the Shangri-La is just, it sells and screams Hong Kong to me because it's just like the combination of neon, bright red, gaudy shit, but along with that, just like a couple of piles of garbage and I'm not saying Hong Kong's dirty, but I mean it's a
bustling restaurant.
There's a lot going on in Hong Kong. And just like some of the stuff that looks like it belongs on a dock or on a ship that's floating in Aberdeen Harbor.
Yeah.
Aberdeen Harbor is kind of a dump.
This is true. And I got to make a balcony, which is cool. I don't think we've ever done that before in an exterior wall set.
No.
Not in an exterior wall set, in an interior wall set.
Yeah, that actually turned out really well, the exterior of the building, and we got to take some liberties to kind of make the space a little bit more, I don't know, interesting than perhaps the Jumbo Kingdom, because the Jumbo Kingdom is just 4 walls, a few floors, and a lot of neon, and so Spencer got to put a little bit more design into having these different decks and staircases, patio areas, and that kind of sells it as this kind of ritzier restaurant that it is.
I also swear to you that whenever my wife and I end up going to Hong Kong, hopefully sometime soon, I will go and I will eat at Jumbo Kingdom just for you.
Have the crab rangoon on me.
Just don't poison anybody or get in a gunfight.
I'm pretty good at not doing those things.
That's the thing. It's such a great spot for a big gunfight with the.
You have to stop yourself.
Criminals.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean it's
all makes sense.
Connor, tell me about the trials and tribulations of Rooster, and the fist that isn't.
Yeah, so initially the mission was like many things with doing a bank run against another bank, but we wanted to get some more triad stuff earlier into the game, so it ended up being that you were going against triads, and I had this idea of a triad who was not, again, kind of like as Tyler did with Exit Stage Left, a triad who wasn't really a good triad. Like, he's kind of weak and meek, and he kind of got his way by backstabbing and just being a slimy dude.
He's like an accountant.
He's an accountant. He's a paper pusher, and he works in a crew that does mostly accounting. So I wanted to have this kind of cowardly dude who is in a position of power, and that kind of sets it up for when you kidnap him, when you extract him. And so I went through a lot of iterations with this part of the mission where you have control of Rooster, and you have to get him out. And it was very difficult because initially I wanted to have objectives structured around his well-being. It is an escort mission of sorts. You need to keep him alive for sure to get paid, and you also want to keep him relatively unharmed as well. But the only way that can happen is if the enemies can attack him. And so then this kind of devolves into the same old problem of any escort mission in any game ever, which is there's some dumb AI who's running around, like running into walls or going through doors without your permission and getting shot in the face, and you're constantly struggling against their kind of behavior to do the mission appropriately.
It is an old saw that escort missions are the worst type of mission in any game.
And so
for a good reason.
Yeah, and I took a cue from XCOM, which is that they have escort missions where you have control over a civilian who doesn't have the ability to fight, and you have to keep them alive. But they give you control of this person directly, explicitly. So I did that at first, and in the way that our engine is structured, it basically meant that I could take all his guns away, but he still had these fists. And so...
Damn your hands, Rooster! Damn your hands!
And initially, he had a pistol, and so he'd whip out his gun, and he'd start shooting at the triads. But I'm like, if you're kidnapping a guy, and I got a lot of feedback, if you're kidnapping a guy from his crew, and his crew comes to save him, he's not going to start shooting his own people. Like, that's insane. It wouldn't make sense. And so... I had to work on that, and so basically I moved him into a third neutral team where you didn't control him, but you still had to keep him alive. And then that again goes back to the old problem of you don't have explicit control over this guy, but he is part of your objective. And so he would just sit in one place and he'd get grenaded and shot, and it's super frustrating. So ultimately, the scheme I landed on was I had to have him on your team where you could control him, but I had to make a new empty weapon for him that didn't do anything. So I worked with Trevor to get that working. But then we had to reconcile the problem of you have this icon that says you can punch people in the face.
Yeah, so late in the game's production cycle, I got a task that was make a weapon icon that isn't a weapon. So what I did was I made an open hand with a question mark over it. I don't know, is this a hand?
Is it not a hand? So, yeah, it was just like the process of going through.
I don't know what to do with this.
Yeah, damn Rooster and your not hands. And so, yeah, it was just a tough thing to kind of figure out how we wanted to do that. And I also have to thank Alon a lot for this because again, it was kind of a linchpin of the mission at the end. This final fight is like you're one man down because one of your crew members is working on the door to get you out of the mission. You also have this extra dead weight of Rooster being there, so you're basically trying to protect two people at once with 3 runners against like 6 or 7 dudes. So it was meant to be a very tense and kind of challenging fight, and one that you could choose to retreat from as soon as the door was open. And so I had to work with Alon to get like an actual understanding of why these triads are shooting at you, and that kind of played into the cowardly, meek character that is Rooster, which is he didn't really earn his station. The people who work for him don't even like him, and now they see an opportunity to take him out and be kind of rewarded for it, because as a triad, like any criminal is being kidnapped and rendered to a person who wants to interrogate him, he's going to spill his beans. So Talon kind of has this moment where he's like, I don't even like you in the first place.
And I hate coming to this restaurant.
But I hate the food here. I get sick, but at least now, when I kill you, the bosses are going to like me because I kept your mouth shut. And so I worked with Alon on that, and it actually came out sounding really good. And at first it was kind of confused and confounded. So, but yeah, it's just part of the whole process of figuring out how to make the game work.
Nothing like crying out, help me, and the response being, go to hell, you're an asshat.
I'm going to shoot you.
This is not what I wanted.
Yeah, so like Tyler said, it kind of plays from a cut of a movie. It's kind of slapsticky and kind of funny, but it's at the end of the day, you're kidnapping criminals, so that's always fun. So Banshee was something that we kind of talked about it earlier in the Walled City, but one of those things where in Hong Kong, Qi and Feng Shui have like a very serious impact, and so we had kind of like all the designers have a shared list of just, hey, this would be great, spitballing ideas for runs we'd want to do, and in the source books for Shadowrun, there is this concept of Geomantic Sabotage, the idea that like geomancers are paid these huge New Yen contracts to construct buildings in certain ways to channel energy, and then there are people who are paid, Shadowrunners, to go and just wreck that and just totally disrupt all that stuff. And so given that we're in Hong Kong, like this is something that could only happen in Hong Kong. You would never be paid in any other city in the world to do Geomantic Sabotage, so I knew that was something that I wanted to bring into the game. And because we're in Hong Kong, Wu Qing is there, and they are basically sitting astride like the largest dragon line in the city. It's this kind of the energy center of the entire Hong Kong area. So I was like, all right, that's what we're going to. We're going to have this idea of getting in there and just messing with their feng shui. And so it kind of turns out to be a corporate run, a very simple, normal corporate run, but the twist is that what you're doing in terms of sabotage is pretty atypical, and the idea being that when the mission kind of culminates at the top in this larger fight and larger destruction, that's more of a guise for the disruption you're doing on the lower levels, which you hopefully will be overlooked by the company and have a more long-term impact. So that was pretty clear and cut and dry from the beginning of what I wanted to do.
You're paid to make a mess.
You're paid to make a mess that's actually covering a smaller, more kind of toxic mess underneath. And so...
What was the reactor line? We're being paid a lot of money to jostle the tables?
I think that's right, yeah, and that was Andrew.
But actually, I think that was Alon.
Was that Alon?
I think it was Alon.
Yeah, Alon was the writer on that one.
Yeah, and so there was a lot of fun stuff we got to do with that, and I got to give a lot of props to Will and Spencer for really selling Wu Qing, because I put a lot of research into it, and I actually, if you go back and you play the mission, I actually laid out both of the floors according to the Feng Shui Bagua map, which says in these different sections you should have these elements. So if you go back in, there's different quadrants, like knowledge is where the servers and the data are stored. In other areas there's fire, and so if you just actually have a Bagua map up next to the mission map, it has actually a direct mapping of the area, because I really wanted to sell the whole Feng Shui thing. But Will and Spencer sold that area, and we have this great visual effect that Will built, which is Wu Qing has this iconic in the source books, this octagonal atrium that runs through all 88 floors, 88 being a lucky number in Chinese, excuse me. And so I was like, we gotta have this, we gotta make it look awesome. Spencer built the tile set and it looks amazing, but it was just this kind of black hole in the center. And I was like, oh, that's kind of dull, I don't know what we do with this. And then Will and some of our designers were like, well, what if we had some sort of like visual representation of the chi getting messed up? And so Will built this great swirling vortex of blue energy. And so once you tip the scales past a certain point with the chi disruption, and you get this great effect where all the chi is running towards the center and just pooling in the middle.
Yeah,
so,
that's really cool.
And Spencer did a lot of stuff on the mission. If you want to talk about the tile set stuff that you did.
Yeah, well, you talked about the Bagua map, and I thought that was really cool that you had all of that in mind as you were creating it. Because you came to me when you were ready for an art pass, and I was just like, okay, I'll make an office building. But you were like, no, I got this cool map, and I was like, okay, man, I'll make a wood area and a glass area and stuff. And so it was really cool to work with you off of that.
Tell us about the mummies. We need to know about the mummies in the mummy dimension.
Yes.
There are mummies that live underground.
And when they punch you, what happens?
If you get punched,
punch you into a different dimension.
You get punched into a different dimension called the mummy dimension.
That was okay. So I think I was the first person to play through that mission
without knowledge.
Who was not Trevor, because Trevor got his first iteration done, and I think I was the first designer to hit it. And I remember playing it and getting into that combat encounter down in the catacombs of the tombs there. And I'm a very gung-ho player, and I think I ran Gaichu out in the middle of nowhere, just hacking people up, and he got hit by this preternatural corpse, this mummy, and all of a sudden fade to black, and all of a sudden my camera is on Gaichu in a different area, and I just leaned over my chair and I just said, Trevor, did you just punch me into a different dimension? it was one of the best, most surprising moments of developing the game.
I remember
so
that.
much
Right?
fun.
The rest of us, I think, kind of knew. We're just like, yeah, man, it's mummy dimension. Like, don't you know?
I damn near choked laughing when he goes, yeah, when the mummies punch you, they punch you into the mummy dimension. I was like, that's amazing.
It's one of the best parts about everybody being in one room.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where you go?
This is game development.
Oh man, it was so much fun.
Yeah, honestly, this mission was pretty much all Trevor. I mean, I was technically the writer on it. My only real contribution was having the Mummy King want to make a deal with you to carry a thing out of the dig site, because personally, if I'm playing and there are mummies, I want to talk to the mummies, and I want there to be some sort of mummy-related choice. But that's
as a writer, I'm guessing you want to talk to everybody.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, the more horrible monsters you could get on your side, the better.
I'm pretty sure you would talk to a vending machine if they gave you the option.
Spencer, as the designer of the visuals for the
mummy dimension.
The mummy dimension.
That was
I don't know, what was that?
That was really fun. So, creating Mummy Dimension, first of all, every morning at Scrum I would say I'm working on the Mummy Dimension, which was freaking awesome. But it was the first environment where I could really get abstract with the colors and just what in general it was. So floating rocks, it was a really, really fun environment to work on, and it was awesome. I don't know.
Well, the thing that really stuck out to me was purple. Yeah. Just drenched in purple.
Yeah.
And there's nothing else in the game that's like that.
It's got a unique.
And, it's a great compliment.
Spencer Curtis drenched in purple.
I thought that was his first album. It's really so good.
Some people on the forums have said, this is crazy. How could a mummy punch you into a mummy dimension? For the tabletop nerds like me, they have the astral gate power. That is what they're using.
I would just hand wave and say Shadowrun.
Because
some of us like to have very specific ideas of what's going on.
Yeah,
fair enough.
I'd also like to thank Trevor for the majesty of business casual.
Yeah, here.
Business casual.
Yeah, I totally forgot about that. I put in some options in the computer. I was just kind of bored one day, where you hack into the CEO's computer in his office and you can select to change the lighting of the room. And he had some presets in there where you could turn on the party lights where it just starts flashing red and blue lights. And I just put in one of the simple light scripts to shift the lighting around. But when John Everest found it, when he was playing through the scene, he knew that he needed to add something to it, so he wrote a little techno loop that I think took him about 5 minutes in real time, and then he sent it over and I hooked it up, and that's the end of that story.
So I think before we talk about extraction itself, it would be wise to talk about the plastic-faced man, because he became a through line to the story, right? And he wasn't set up that way. It was just there's a guy. We were off-site one day when we realized what to do there.
We were doing an off-site writers meeting, and in the very beginning there was no plastic-faced man. It was Josephine Sang's secretary.
Right.
And we came to the realization that we needed a character who would be a gateway to vital information that leads you into the Sang Tower run. And if this character was going to have information that was that important, we needed to make more of a presence out of the character. It couldn't
Right,
just
and I started calling him the Fat Man.
Yeah.
Right.
And so, I think the evolution of it was there was the Fat Man, and then I thought, well, it's like in spy movies, there's the man with the red briefcase,
Right,
or the
exactly. We wanted to be able to describe this character in just one simple simple word choice.
And I think it was Mike McCain who came up with the plastic-faced man.
Yeah.
We're just looking for an easy visual cue that you could latch onto in Act 1, and then that would serve as a lead. And this is kind of a larger problem too, and it's one that we've faced before, and that I think a lot of other RPGs have faced, which is how do you keep the mainline story motivation alive in Act 2 without over-indexing on the urgency of the situation, and so we had to find that balancing act. We had earlier drafts where Raymond's kidnapped and you're supposed to get Raymond back.
Why would you not do that right now?
There's a lot of urgency implied in an active kidnapping situation like that, and then the reality of the game that we were making is, well, we want Act 2 to support the notion that you're becoming a Shadowrunner and that you're able to engage on all these covert operations for Kindly or even for other clients at different points in the game. So that just felt at odds with such a personal okay, but we got to go rescue our foster father. There's a lot of iteration there to find the right balance of there's a compelling clue chain through the second act, and it sort of revolves around this mysterious figure that you think killed Raymond, and finding
right, but we didn't know any of that when Trevor actually designed the mission.
Yeah.
No.
when I started making the mission, all I knew was you need to get to a guy and talk to him about something.
So again, the previous point, game development proceeds in a nice orderly fashion.
It was in the end, and I would just hear during Scrum people talk about this plastic-faced man that I never heard about before, and it was very mysterious to me, and it hooked me just really from that name.
You'd really try to add mystery to game development. Because that's what makes
it had to be really.
You can't
we try to make the process of making the game a game unto itself.
It had to be really interesting for you seeing the rise and fall of various characters. Orchid Sang isn't a thing anymore, but now there's the plastic-faced man.
That was sad for me.
Yeah. So all right, so back to Extraction for a minute.
So yeah, I think it was me and Andrew just went into a room and came up with the basic concept for the mission, which was to have the player figure out where this guy's gonna be and then be able to choose where to go. That's like just the core.
And where you're gonna take it.
I think that idea was totally gold.
I loved
because
it.
it's so different than any other mission in any Shadowrun game that we've made.
So it branches and you go to a different combat area and have a different outcome based on which kind of. And it lets you roleplay a little bit too, of like, what would my character do? Like, would they go like hit him where it hurts, or would they choose, where there's not going to be any bystanders get hurt in the shooting? Like, I thought that was a really cool concept. So it helped me create the mission pretty quickly because it was just a solid base to work with, and we didn't know any of the story stuff about who the plastic face man was or any of that, but it didn't really matter just because the concept for what the player's doing was strong enough that it drove the development for a while until
that's how you know you have a good mission.
I confess, I assumed the plastic-faced man had like a lot of plastic surgery when people were talking about him because there wasn't any concept art for him, and I was like, oh, he's a very pretty guy. He must be like Josephine Tsang's face. And then I saw the first concept, and I'm like, oh no, he's got like a robotic plastic head.
Robot.
Yeah,
awesome.
and actually, and in the writing, it turns out, well, actually, his whole head is plastic, and there's stuff inside there. Yeah,
Fun character to work into the opening animatic. Too.
Yeah. So then I made sure that the very first thing he says to you is to comment on your decision on where to take him, just to reinforce your decision. That was a really fun character to write because he was so dispassionate. He was so professional about the whole thing. You expect sort of cat and mouse with the guy. But it's just like, no, that's cool. I'm a professional.
I know the score.
Yeah. No, I'll tell you anything you need to know. Oh, and by the way, about that one, this is one where McCain and I had a little... It wasn't a conflict. It was like, didn't I tell you not to do that? Yeah, you did. Because we had the idea of the... when Andrew and Mike and I conceived of that scene, we had talked about, wouldn't it be cool if there was like this sort of countdown clock, like his brain is going to get erased and you need to get the information out before it's too late. And for scope reasons, we decided we were going to turn that into sort of a mini game and stuff, heavily designed, conversation mini game. And McCain's like, let's not do that. And as I'm writing it, I just sort of, well, couldn't I just simulate that just in typing, without that? And then Mike played it. Didn't I tell you not to do that? Like, it's kind of willful disobedience.
I feel like I was more tactful.
Yeah, it was something like that.
Maybe not actually.
No. The tact isn't really a strong suit, by the way. But it came out, and having that characters. A lot of the times we don't really talk about this, but when we come up with these characters and we start trying to find the voice of the characters, a lot of the times we think about actors who might play that character, and that one for me in my head was very clearly one actor. It was James Spader, right? Specifically in Blacklist, right? That was it for me, and that's that's why that character was actually really easy to write.
So yeah, Sing Tower was a big... I know it's the largest thing I've ever built. From all the Shadowrun stuff that I've worked on, I started with the first one, Returns, and continued...
It was bigger than As Technology.
Yeah, it was bigger than As Technology. As Technology sort of feels big because there's a lot of scene changes, but in terms of just like amount of content, there is way more in Sing Tower, especially the Matrix stuff. Because this scene had a couple of really large goals, and it had to sort of hit them all together. And I have a bad habit / good habit of being really passionate about making stuff. And I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna do all this stuff, and then it's like, oh man, like the calendar.
What did I sign up?
Yeah, you're just like, oh man.
Would you say you're your own worst enemy?
Well, a bit. When I comes to that.
Was that a loaded question?
Well, yeah, that was a loaded question.
Let's go to therapy, guys.
Yeah. Let's all.
Something that are Skeletor is his worst enemy. You never can tell.
More accurate, is that Mitch is your worst enemy?
Mitch? I don't know. I mean, he's up there, yeah.
In the pantheon.
Yeah,
Sure.
of all my enemies, but yeah.
Well, it's kind of like Hotel in a way, right?
Yeah, the hotel in Dragonfall was kind of an inspiration with like different floors, different mini quests that wove together in different ways. So you get through there in different ways. And the thing too is like you can play that on a spectrum too. It's like it's any combination of I'm a very charismatic person who wants to explore the environment and find different things and get through this situation like as covert as possible, or am I just like the kind of person who's like I don't really care about the subtleties of all this. I'm going to get straight to my goal and I'm just going to shoot everything and get there. So yeah, and like in that whole mission, it plays like just totally along that spectrum. You can either be, it even supports people that are like halfway down a career. Like if you're like somewhat spec for charisma, there's still like you can get part of the way towards those goals. So man, what else?
I think the thing that was important about that mission is, well, first of all, you were going to get Raymond.
Yeah.
Right? And that was the big thing, sort of narratively. You know, you don't really see him in the beginning of the game, right? We reference him throughout the entire game, and you never interact with him, and finally you're going to get, and there's that sort of release moment. But before that release moment, there's this giant tension-filled thing that you're doing. So you've been missing him the entire time. You've seen him talk to his mother on the plastic-faced man's video feed, right? But this is a big moment, and before that rising tension, there's that sort of sphincter that you have to go through.
Yeah.
Like that better, I suppose.
Works.
That's an object that you can pass through.
Yeah.
Thank you. And see.
Yeah. But yeah, so one of the things that's interesting about in terms of the goal of what you know going into that scene, you know Raymond is there, but you don't know exactly where, you don't know how to get to him, and you don't know how you're really going to get him out. All you know is that the Sang security stations have the information that you need. And so if you get to one of those, you'll start to get the answers that you need to actually go figure out where he is in this building.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I really liked about the way that you get into the Prosperity Tower mission is that you have the choice between the two entry methods, either through the garage.
You may.
If you have done your due diligence in previous scenes.
Bad cheat.
But either way, when you go in, you're really running in blind. Like, okay, I'm making a run on a corporation. I've got very little information about the kind of opposition that I'm going to be encountering, and I don't know who the best team is for this. But
you don't have a choice. It's a desperation play.
We're going to go in, and it's the only mission that I played where I really felt like I had failed while succeeding, because things went awry for me very, very quickly, and I just began murdering everything I saw.
Yeah, that resembles my playthrough too.
And all of my character and Isabel and Gobbet and all them, they had very little health, and I was constantly on the verge of death, just like hunkered down, blind firing with fully automatic weapons. Where I'm like, this is very effective at selling the desperation. Oh God, I'm gonna die.
And there's this really quick, there's sort of a design philosophical axe I want to grind real quick. Is that it's like, if someone said, well, I feel that I've missed out on content because I chose this kind of character, and instead, for production reasons and keeping your players happy, I wouldn't say doing it huge amounts of a game that way. But in certain places, it's just that's the breaks. To make character builds and character choices meaningful, there needs to be consequence. And you can't just be like, you get to do everything perfect because with all builds and all choices. It's just what is the worth of these choices?
And it worked really well when you finally get to the scene with Raymond, because I was playing a character that was a decker and had a lot of firepower. I was like, all right, crack my knuckles, now's where I get to go to work and really get to save the day while everybody else fires at that door. I may not have been able to talk my way in here, but I can slice that fucking ice.
Yeah, and also too, the other thing too is there was basically, because you could go to any one of the floors in any order that you chose, and only 2 of the 3 are required to progress. And then after that, like I sort of mentioned before, you can, but there are more advantages and more to do if you so choose. But setting it up that way, it makes it more interesting then like, okay, I made this stuff, so I force you to do all this stuff, whether you want it or not, because I made it, and it's awesome, and you're going to experience it, and you're going to like it.
We paid for it!
Yeah, it's just like, no, it's there if you need it, and you can do some interesting stuff with it should you choose to, but, I mean, it's the player gets to decide, right?
Yeah.
Remember that first piece of concept that we did for the, and by we I mean you, did for the Matrix?
I did a concept with this giant orb in the background, and there were these two dragons guarding a gate that was like a virtual pagoda, and then there was a whole bunch of Chinese architecture in the Matrix, and we were just trying to hit what the sculpted system would look like in like a specific area of Hong Kong. Like who would own this.
So that turned into the Sang Tower sculpted system.
Right.
Which is Prosperity Tower in game.
It evolved.
Which is Prosperity Tower in the game.
Yeah, there were many iterations of that concept, and we went back and forth and down and around and up and down, and so we eventually ended up at the Matrix concept with the big cube, and that was just the plain Matrix.
Mm-hmm.
No,
that
was sculpted system.
No, we had the owl flying around
you're
the
right.
whole thing. Yeah. No. I remember it vividly because for pre-production was bustling along at that point, if you remember. Design and art, and we're just popping, and we get to that one Matrix image, and everything stops dead for a minute because we just like, we gotta get this, and we were gonna release it also during our Kickstarter, so we wanted it to be, dynamic, and really a set piece for us, and so the three of us decided, no, we'll iterate on this thing for a while.
Didn't it take another month or so of work?
It was not a month. Am I right?
It felt like a month.
Actually, it felt like a month.
It was
an
a long
HBS.
time.
There was a few weeks where that was what you were doing.
It was a couple of weeks, for sure.
It was more than
it was just, getting. Do you feel pain?
No.
Because in the pantheon of enemies,
I lived in the Matrix. I chose.
Well, that was the major feature development too, right? Like, we've this was our third and a half Shadowrun game, and we've certainly added incrementally to the tool set and to the feature set over time, but I think the Matrix was the first real big new feature that required significant investment from art and design and engineering to make that new vision of the Matrix for Shadowrun Hong Kong work. So I think, on top of just, how can we really nail the visual concept for this and bring something fresh to it in a world where Tron exists already and the various incarnations of the Shadowrun Matrix have existed, but also
Matrix.
Also how do we make those lofty visual goals work within the engine that we've developed, and how do we make it jive with the new patterns of gameplay that we're working on, and with just the overall mood that we're shooting for. So.
Yeah, that was really proud of your work, Tristan, especially because talking about pushing the envelope on what the engine can do. I was really after like a lot of different Matrix tile sets in the beginning. If you remember, that's part of the whole sculpted system thing. I wanted Matrix neighborhoods.
Yeah,
right.
Well, the one was going to have a specific sculpted system because that's in the source.
Canonically, it does.
It has a
but you came up with some clever stuff there, like just for example, making everything grayscale in the Matrix and using lighting to change that. I thought was a brilliant move.
That was amazing. We were all like dancing around.
It was definitely like a light bulb.
Yeah, there were these moments in game development that just make the whole thing worthwhile. And one for me was coming up behind you while you were working on the Matrix, but you were working
because artists love this, by the way. Oh yeah. When they're painting something and you sneak up behind.
Well, he wasn't painting; he was actually in the editor this time. But he had these floating cubes because you were experimenting with. Wait a minute, if I just take this x-axis and move it up here or something, and you created that, and we hadn't really. I didn't know that was going to
parallax.
Yeah. When you did that, man, I think there may have been a hug and a kiss there too.
It makes it feel super dense as opposed to that flat empty.
And 3-dimensional, which was one of our goals originally.
Yeah, you have things moving below you and above you, and like that was one of the things we wanted to get in the Matrix was a sense of life. It's like things were moving around and you were doing
Data's flowing around you.
Yeah, while everyone else is in the Matrix doing their own thing, and like. when I was doing the concept, I took a lot of inspiration and direction from the design, like the Watcher Ice, and I wanted to kind of leave room for them to kind of draw inspiration from the concepts as well, so that, you know, I could give direction for them and they could give direction for me both ways. And then, so when I was doing the actual tile sets, I made sure that I had like plenty of room in all of my the tiles and the floor sets that I was making, that I could accompany anything that they wanted.
I gotta give a shout out to Eleanor Wingo for the new Matrix Ice, for like the black ice destroyer ice models and stuff like that. They're really scary. I don't want to be attacked by them. Yeah. They're all hard edges, angles, and acute stabby bits.
The new character stuff, like for all the new ice stuff that we got in there, like refreshing some of the older ones, and then also adding like the tank and the Watcher and blocker.
And the spirits too.
Yeah.
Well, the blocker ice looks great. It's just this monolithic, like Watcher. It's kind of like the Eye of Sauron, and you're not bounded by the reality of physics. So like it could be 20 times taller than you, and you can just be looking up at it, and that can feel right in the Matrix.
Well, the goal was, and I remember, and I can't remember this person's Steam ID, but they reacted to our original version of the Matrix. I think they said something like, "It feels like a fight in an empty nightclub against ghosts."
That's a fantastic description.
And I'm like, okay, that's funny and maybe a little mean, but
feedback taken.
Yeah, so let's like what?
Maybe he's an introvert and a ghost, paranormal.
Maybe, but like even the snarkiest of snark, for the most part, has like someone's reacting to something, and it's just like, and that particularly stuck in my brain, kind of because it was funny too. But the thing is like basically the beef was, while this is a thing that you do in the game, this doesn't really feel like I'm getting into a computer system, is the thing. So it's like, okay, what we want to add is that you're like an aspect of infiltration and like and actually like hacking some stuff, rather than just like what it was, which was a reskinned combat dungeon with a timer, which is what it was before. We did some fun stuff with like, you know, stuff happening in the real world and time duress under that. We did some fun stuff with it. It was one of the things with the Watcher Ice where we set it up, so basically it's a timing puzzle essentially, is how they're all set up. But one of the things that which was of course very obvious to us because we made all the content, but wasn't clear to some people, was that because they had real-time input, they thought it was like a Twitch-based challenge to actually like react fast enough with the mouse to get their person through there. And it's like, well, there is an aspect to the avatar's speed. It is basically a timing puzzle. Like
it's like the original Splinter Cell. It wasn't about running. It was about stay in this spot until the Watchers move. Then move to that spot.
Yeah, and that's the way.
Choose your spot.
Yeah, and choose your spot of safety, and that was the idea, and that's what we did. But didn't quite communicate very as clearly as I would have liked. But most people seem to have a pretty good time with it. And the other big ad was the Blocker Eyes hack puzzle, which was a monstrous UI challenge. I learned a lot about UI documentation, which is, it helps if you have pictures.
Yes.
And like, I had never done a feature like that before, and I called up a buddy who had worked at EA for years, and I was like, dude, I'm having this horrible problem with this documentation. And he's just like, well, are you using like state flow diagrams? I'm like, okay, I'm writing this down, go ahead. And then I totally was swimming upstream on that, but we figured it all out, and luckily I had Eric in New Island and Garrett in engineering land to go through that and make that happen.
And a Simon expert to
test Chris Klemecki, fastest hands in the West, right there, man. Like
surprising everyone.
Yeah, surprising the guy, because he could use the numpad to help do that. And Chris is his producer, so he spends a lot of time with numbers. So and he's a musician.
I chalk up to the guitar.
The guitar, yeah.
No, that all adds up to freak to me.
Just a beast. And the last thing
to me,
right? Other than getting all that UI interesting stuff together, the last 2 points on that. One was, what was interesting about it is seeing repetitions in the pattern. was the thing that was actual difficulty. The length of the solution you were going for had very little impact. It was how many like solutions am I choosing from? So Garrett did some pretty amazing stuff with engineering, so I had direct control over all that stuff. It was very cool.
This is called City of Death.
Right.
The first time you're in the Walled City is City of Darkness.
And the Walled City has been called historically City of Darkness.
So basically, you know, what I wanted to do there is, this is kind of the lead up to the final confrontation. So we didn't want this to be the blowout, you know, that kind of mutes the final confrontation, but we did want to have a rising action. So I wanted to have both a visual and a gameplay representation of how, as you approach your objective, things become a little bit more unhinged. So I had this idea of kind of wards or sectors or rings, and so blocks basically, but they're all moving towards a central point. As with many urban developments, like the most remote places, which are away from the other influences, are often the worst. So kind of like every time you move through another ring gets worse.
Now, did you start with the Walled City tile set, the base Walled City tile set, and then just make it worse and worse from there? Or how did that work?
It was basically like take a bag of garbage,
There's a lot of
which
layering.
is the first one, which is the first walled city, and then it's just like take all of the trash in the whole world
and put it into the later section.
You're such a litterer.
Yeah.
Well,
give a hoot.
And and that's what it was very much a visual thing of like, as you move through, it becomes denser, darker, but it also becomes more derelict and less inhabited.
and originally it was way more on fire, but somebody took all the fire out because it would have broken.
Yeah, well, that's
everything.
pushing the engine to its kind of maximum of what it could allow. But yeah, it was going to be who you fight and how you interact is going to change as you move through. So at first it's civilians and Sang, and it's pretty contained, and then you move in and it's these kind of civilians who are acting a little bit haywire. Sang is opening fire on civilians. You're not really sure what's happening. You kind of know why you're there, but you don't know why everybody else is there. You don't know what the civilians are doing. You don't know why Sang is there quite yet. And then as you move further in, you just start to see Qian Ya's kind of domain reaching into the real world, and you start to see the servitors. And so Trevor and then the character team with Eleanor and Maury and Joel, they built these really fucking awesome servitor spirits, but they only really existed in the final scene, and we wanted to pull them out of there and get a little bit more use out of them and even foreshadow the final fight. So I worked with Trevor to build kind of weakened, you know, whelp versions of these things that weren't super hard to kill, but were still imposing in a large number. And we sprinkled those into the end confrontation in Showdown Scene 1, leading into the final confrontation. So it's all about the kind of, you know, the heart of darkness, you know, the descent into madness, where everything is getting worse and worse. The civilians who are sane turn into insane civilians, turn into dead bodies the further you go in. And Mitch was helping with writing, and Andrew as well on that.
Well, what we didn't want to do was make it an escort mission.
Right.
That was a big deal for us.
Yes.
Yeah, so that led to the idea of there being an A team and a B team, and that worked out pretty well anyway, because there's a limit to the number of people you have on your team in our game, and we didn't want to have the people who you didn't choose to bring just hanging out at home. Right. So, you know, the B team would escort Raymond.
And babysit.
What about the Monster Squad?
Yeah, and that's what
it is possible for there to be an all-star team-up between you and Ku Feng if you gave her vampire lessons.
Yeah, so basically what that was is Exit Stage Left was actually the first mission I played in development, and Tyler had it pretty much wrapped up when I joined the team in production to start building missions, and I really kind of fell in love with that kind of banal, really bad vampire character of like an accountant who has become this vampire. And so
she got drunk once.
Yeah, and I talked to him about it, and I was like, hey, you know, we gotta have the payoff for decisions. Like all the agency in the game, we have these kind of small decisions, and we want to pay that off somehow. And some of them are the kind of small character nods that, you know, Kevin and I did with Isabel yelling at you for breaking stuff, but there's also, we want to have a gameplay impact. So I talked to Tyler and I was like, can I just have, if you go down that route of helping Ku Feng out and not killing her and not banishing her and giving her lessons and kind of teaching her how to be a good monster, can we bring her back in the last mission? And he's like, I don't care, go
Hell
for it.
yeah, man.
Yeah, that sounds like a great time. So,
in general, the answer to questions is always going to be yes,
yeah,
right?
go for it. So we built a character sheet for her, and we brought her into the mission, and I wanted to have this really cool moment where you see this person who is beset by this imposing attacker, who in this case was this Sang Commando, and this great moment where the person turns around and kind of stuns them and then just annihilates them and just eats them, and you're like, what the shit? And it turns around and it's your old buddy Ku Feng, and just have that tie into the earlier parts of the game. And then if you can kind of schmooze her, she'll join your squad. And then we were like, we'll tie in even more with the other characters in your squad. If you have Gaichu and her, you have both a ghoul zombie and a vampire on your team.
Did the mummy get in there too?
Yeah, if you got the mummy talisman
from the museum room.
You could also have a mummy, and all that is necessary. all that is necessary to get the achievement is Ku Feng and Gaichu. That gives you the monster squad.
But yeah, and it's just again one of those character moments where Isabel is just very opposed to the idea of the supernatural, both from her own backstory and her upbringing, and her being a very technical person. And so she's like, you want to have a vampire join our squad? And if you have Gaichu there, he's just kind of like, hey, I've been running with you guys for a while and no one's been eaten yet. I don't see what the problem is. Like, why don't you check your bigotry at the door, Isabel? And so it's just one of those kind of fun moments where we get to tie in all these kind of characters that the writers and the character team and the designers have managed to build out and just bring it back. So we actually did break the character limit in terms of, we put 5 people on your squad, and you can kind of have an overpowered moment where you're kind of running amok with this vampire.
So the final boss fight with Qian Ya, I think it really only went through 2 iterations. From a design point of view, the first iteration was more like the mummy dimension mechanics that we had in the museum. I wanted to have it be a little more chaotic and have Qian Ya able to basically grab a random person from your team and take them into the dimension where you see her true face, kind of. And you have to kind of deal with that and not know who's going to get taken. But it ended up just being kind of buggy, and it was also just throwing some wrenches in places where we needed to have story stuff going on, and like if a random person is taken, like how do we know where everyone is?
There's also the balancing act of if it pulls one of your non-combat characters, your charisma face man, or Gobbet can kind of be, she's kind of weak on her own, and you pull her into a different dimension by herself.
Bye.
Juggling dimensions is just the challenge in general.
Yeah. Oh, I found it. Whenever I juggled dimensions.
Yeah, the first couple of times that people played that version, also it was just like, I died. She killed me, and then it was over.
They did get smoked pretty hard.
So we streamlined that a little bit, made it a little more straightforward.
2 phases.
Yeah, you fight phase 1, you fight phase 2, you get your story moments in there, and it worked out a lot cleaner, which was good because we didn't have time to start creating bugs at the last minute with that scene.
Plus, time to do a lot of other things at the last minute.
This is a moment to call out again the art, because both how Qian Ya looked, but also the work that Jen and Spencer did on the Fortune engine itself.
That turned out beautifully.
Amazing.
The Fortune engine and the Qian Ya dimension, which is also a reflection of her
teeth walls.
Teeth walls.
Well,
that's all.
And also too, is like when we also reflected this in like the flashbacks and stuff too, with Qian Ya and her teeth that she's got, and how she
has 1,000 of them.
1,000 of the teeth.
She has to clean up.
And the
width.
The fact
that's a
that
preposition.
with the walled city and with what it was is that it was like, and what the Fortune engine was, it was acting as a focal point, basically like a gigantic feng shui key funnel of bad news, and that was all sort of like interdimensionally going straight down her throat. It was just like it was very cool how like all that flashback stuff, the design of the Fortune engine, the nature of Key in Hong Kong Shadowrun, and the design of that character, sort of like it was all separately delivered getting up to that point, but then when you see it all, and how much you realize it doesn't even really matter. It's just like that theme is reflected all the way through. It was really cool.
Don't punch holes in astral space. It's bad.
Yeah.
I don't know, to be perfectly honest, if we sold all the logic of the moment and of the Fortune engine's mechanism and whatnot, but I feel pretty good about selling the emotion of the fight and the conflict with
the other thing is, as storytellers, we added a new tool to our toolkit, right, with the animatics, that we haven't called that out either. Same team, of course, because it's a small team, but
in the history of the Fortune engine in our story, like when it was when it was super complex, that worked a lot worse. Like we had some iterations where we tried to explain it, and it was just like, no, it's much better to just.
What's the history of the Maltese Falcon? Well, it was owned by the Knights Templars, and it drives the plot, and that's pretty much all you need to know about it because
it comes from Malta.
Yeah. There's such a thing as over-explaining things.
And theme and mood and emotion tend to trump logic. So.
Well, I think the other thing that you have to kind of take into account is like if someone could easily explain and manipulate the astral energy and key of the world, somebody would have done it before Raymond did. So
Raymond's smart, but he doesn't strike me as like the world-changing guy.
Yeah, so
maybe with the right mother, with the right support system, something like that, he could have been.
It really comes back to I blame the family.
Where's the father?
Well, actually, I wanted to take a note. From we talked about early in the rewrites and the kind of changes we made to the story, and it was something that Mitch brought up as to like how we wanted the kind of final moments of the game to land and what we wanted the enemy to be, and it was the idea of the banality of evil.
Oh yeah. That was a theme from the very beginning.
And that, I think, we still landed very well, especially in the aftermath after the showdown, the fight with Qian Ya. And,
nobody's trying to be a bad guy here. Yeah, Qian Ya is obviously an evil, but she's not manipulating things, really.
She's the force of nature.
She just is what she is, right?
There was a hole and she just jumped into
it. Well, exactly. I mean, we sort of likened the fortune engine to an oil spill.
Yep.
It's like, well, the oil spill was an accident. Nobody intended to let oil gush into the ocean. That's not what this project was for. But we're not going to go to the trouble and expense of cleaning it up.
Right.
It's if nobody's going to hold us accountable, why would we do that?
Well, not only that, we're going to cover up that it was actually our oil spill in the first place. So that was a big one. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, and also the discussion you have with Qian Ya and the kind of the idea that you can make a deal with her. Like, that's huge. Because, for me, as a longtime player of games, there's so many times when the bad guy looks at you and says, Luke, come to the dark side, let's conquer the galaxy together. And let's go! Yeah, let's go! Let's hitch up the horses and take over the world.
That's something that we always...
And no game ever allows you to do that. Yeah. But we kind of turned it a little bit and did in this game.
Well, that's something that was very much informed by our earlier experience running Dragonfall, where, in the director's cut, we gave you the option to side with the bad guy in that game, or the antagonist. That's something we very much wanted to do here. In the earlier drafts of the script, writing the conversation with Qian Ya, there was going to be the idea that you could trick Qian Ya in some way, and that would be the best ending. Mm-hmm. And we actually wound up changing that to coercing her using esoteric knowledge that you've gathered from Crafty and from other sources. And I think that was a good change, because tricking a god is a tricky thing to pull off. You run the risk of your god looking stupid, and that's not a great way to reinforce the threat.
You let their own hubris do it for you.